Let me ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Have you ever sat in a room full of people, listened to them talk about their generation, and realized you don't fully belong to either side of the conversation? You're not quite Gen X. You're not really a millennial, but you understand both of them in a way that neither of them understands you. And nobody has ever explained to you why that gap exists. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, this video is going to make you uncomfortable, but it's also going to make something click because today we're going to talk about why you've always felt caught in the middle and why that feeling is not a flaw. It's a fingerprint. There's a term that most people have never heard: Xennial. It's not a trendy label someone invented on Twitter. It's a recognized microgeneration, a thin slice of people who grew up in a world that no longer exists and came of age in a world that wasn't ready for them. You're sandwiched between the cynicism of Gen X and the digital fluency of millennials. You carry pieces of both. But here's the thing nobody talks about: you don't just blend them, you translate between them. And that act of constant translation has shaped your brain, your relationships, your career, and even the way you trust people. But we'll get to that. First, I want you to remember something. Think about a summer afternoon when you were 10 years old. There was no phone in your pocket, no notification pulling your eyes down every 40 seconds. You walked out the front door and the world was just there, unfiltered, unscheduled, and sometimes boring, deeply, painfully boring. And that boredom mattered more than you think. You memorized phone numbers, not two or three, dozens. You made plans with friends by showing up. You said, meet me at the park at 3, and if they weren't there, you waited, and if they didn't come, you went home. There was no texting, where are you? There was no checking their story to see if they were ignoring you. There was just the quiet reality of being alone with your own thoughts. And here's what that did to your brain: it built patience, it built tolerance for ambiguity. It forced you to develop an internal world that didn't depend on external validation. Every few minutes, you learned how to sit with not knowing. And that skill, that capacity to endure uncertainty, is something the generation right after you never had the chance to build in the same way. Now, here's where it gets strange, because while your childhood was analog, your adulthood arrived digitally, and it didn't arrive slowly. One year, you were renting movies from a store and calling your crush on a landline. The next year, you were creating a MySpace profile, choosing your top 8 friends like it was a political decision. Facebook appeared, then Twitter, then the entire architecture of human connection changed, and you were right in the middle of the transition, not as a child absorbing it passively, not as a fully formed adult with a settled identity. You were in your 20s, still figuring out who you were, still building the internal scaffolding of your personality. And this is the part nobody talks about: your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision making, long term planning, impulse control, and understanding consequences, doesn't fully mature until your mid 20s. That's not a theory, that's basic neuroscience. So when the digital revolution hit, your brain was still under construction. You were learning how to be a person and simultaneously learning how to be a person online. Two completely different skill sets arriving at the same time. And you had no roadmap. Gen X had already formed their identity before any of this happened. Millennials grew up inside it. You were standing on the bridge while someone was still building it beneath your feet. Now think about what that means for memory. And I mean this literally. Do you remember doing something embarrassing at a party when you were 19? Of course you do. But does anyone else? Is there a video of it? A tagged photo, a screenshot? Probably not. Your most humiliating, most formative, most ridiculous moments happened in the dark. They exist only in the unreliable theater of human memory. And that's a kind of freedom that people born after 1990 have never known. Here's why that matters. Research in psychology shows that autobiographical memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain edits it slightly. It softens the edges. It adjusts the narrative. Over time, the embarrassing thing becomes a funny story. The heartbreak becomes a lesson. The failure becomes character. But when moments are documented, when there's a photo, a post, a comment thread, the memory becomes fixed. It can't evolve. It can't be rewritten into something you grew from. The documentation freezes you in place. You were the last generation to have private growth. Your identity got to be messy and fluid and unrecorded. And that is a psychological advantage that almost nobody acknowledges. But let's keep going because the timing of your life has another layer to it. Remember 2008? You were probably somewhere between 23 and 32 years old, right in the window when most people are building their careers, signing their first leases, maybe starting families, and the entire financial system collapsed. Not a small dip, a full blown economic crisis that reshaped how an entire generation thinks about money, stability, and trust. Studies on financial behavior consistently show that people who experience economic trauma during their formative career years carry a heightened sensitivity to risk for the rest of their lives. You didn't just hear about the recession on the news, you lived it during the exact years when your brain was cementing its relationship with security. So, if you've ever noticed that you're more cautious with money than your peers, more skeptical of institutions, more hesitant to trust that things will just work out. Now you know why. It's not pessimism, it's a scar that formed at precisely the wrong time. So here's the paradox. And this is the real reason I made this video. You are simultaneously one of the most independent and most adaptable groups of people alive. You can function without technology and you can master it. You understand the value of silence and the mechanics of virality. You carry a deep skepticism about systems and institutions, but you haven't given up on them entirely the way Gen X sometimes did. You still have a thread of optimism, but it's a cautious optimism, an optimism that checks the fine print. You speak two languages, the analog language of patience, boredom, and face to face trust, and the digital language of speed, performance, and curated identity. You switch between them constantly, and that switching is exhausting. It's also your superpower, but it comes with a cost because when you speak two languages, you don't fully belong to either country. And that's why the feeling of being caught in the middle never quite goes away. It's not just about generational identity, it shows up in how you attach to people. You want deep connection, but you're suspicious of how easy digital closeness feels. It shows up in how you work. You value stability, but you've seen too many systems fail to trust any single one. It shows up in how you consume information. You can scroll for an hour and still feel like you haven't found anything real. That chronic in between feeling isn't a disorder. It isn't something broken inside you. It's the natural result of being built by two worlds that don't fully understand each other. You are the bridge, and bridges bear weight from both sides. If that last sentence made something shift in your chest, I want you to sit with it for a second. You don't need a diagnosis. You don't need a label that reduces you. What you need is recognition. The recognition that your experience is specific, that the discomfort you've carried, the feeling of never quite fitting the narrative, has a shape and a reason. And that reason isn't weakness, it's the cost of fluency in two eras. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me this. What's the one moment from your childhood that you're grateful was never recorded? I think the answers are going to be incredible. And if you want to keep going deeper into videos like this, consider subscribing, maybe even joining the membership if you want to support what we're building here. But honestly, just having you watch this far already means something, because you didn't just watch a video about a generation, you watched a video about yourself, and you stayed until the end. That says a lot about who you are.